All right, what's up, guys? We got Robert Breedlove in the house. This is going to be a very different kind of episode. For 4.5 years, you guys have seen me bring health folks onto this channel. Health folks, doctors, biohackers, detoxers. And I think Robert is a little bit into that, according to what my friend told me. But he's going to be talking to us today about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is something that I've shared with you guys several times over the last few years and have given you very, very introductory explanations as to why it's an important technology, why it's digital gold, why everybody should be stacking it and saving it. But this gentleman is one of the most eloquent speakers on the subject, and he's going to come and talk to us today about it. So welcome, Robert.
Hey, Josh. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
So I have a list of questions, but before we get into that, why don't you just tell us about your background and how you got into Bitcoin and why it's important?
Sure. I'll keep it brief. My name is Robert Breedlove. I have a background in accounting and finance. So I have a master's degree in both accounting and finance. Straight out of school, I worked as a tax consultant for high net worth individuals and investment partnerships. So basically helping large pools of capital navigate complex tax structure. Decided that wasn't the right path for me. So I went out on the entrepreneurial path and essentially was a career CFO up until late 2016, early 2017. I had been investing in crypto personally since 14, but it was around that time that I discovered, funny enough, it was Ethereum actually, which is another crypto asset. And they were very heavily marketing the concept of smart contracts. And when I started studying what a smart contract was, which is essentially software that you can automate a commercial relationship between parties. So you can put in contract conditions, you can put money like crypto assets into the contract itself, and then the software will automatically execute once the conditions are fulfilled. I realized at that point that this technology was going to be huge because the entire finance industry is that function. It's just connecting buyers and sellers of capital, essentially. And we do it very heavily with labor and human time now, but it's something that software can automate away. So it was at that point that I had the proverbial light bulb moment and started investing very heavily into crypto. And as I like to tell people, where my money went, my mind followed. And as I started to study the space much more closely, over time, I began to realize that, this is a massive wave of innovation. This technology has a lot of different potential use cases, but there's only one so far that's market proven, and that is Bitcoin. Bitcoin in its current state is disruptive to gold. And that may sound a bit cryptic, but when you come to study the finance industry at a very deep level, you see that gold is the prime monetary layer for the world. So central banks, which own the financial system, settle in gold with one another. And that's because gold was chosen as money on the free market. And everything we use today, these paper fiat currency government debt tokens we use today, they only have value because they were once redeemable for gold. So that never in the free market has a government been able to issue a paperback currency that's just valuable because they said it's valuable. Like, it had to have some redemptive value originally. And over the past 100 years, the right to redeem dollars and other currencies into gold has been removed. And we're essentially all victims of a pyramid scheme today called fiat currency. And I argue in much of my work that this is at the heart of many problems in the world, both socioeconomic, moral, and it's also the mechanism that's used to fund perpetual global warfare and military action in the world. So in a real big sense, Bitcoin is disruptive to that layer, and its great promise is to profoundly change the world by changing money.
So can you talk about what Bitcoin is?
Yeah, this is actually a very popular question, and it can go a million different directions because Bitcoin is a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Yep.
I'll give you two answers. So, one, if I have 30 seconds to explain Bitcoin to someone, if I run into someone in the street, they see my tattoo. I have one tattoo, by the way, it's a Bitcoin tattoo. We can talk more about that later, but if
Yeah.
someone sees that and they ask me, what is Bitcoin? And I've got 30 seconds, right? I'm just passing, just a passerby. I tell them that it is an insurance policy on the legacy financial system or an insurance policy on central banking. And it's a policy that becomes more valuable the more dollars that are printed. So the more units of fiat currency that a government produces, the more value inevitably flows into Bitcoin, which is absolutely scarce. So you can think about this as more dollars chasing less Bitcoin. So the more dollars that are produced, they're chasing a competitive form of money, which is produced less and less every 4 years. And that, even holding demand constant, means Bitcoin appreciates in price. So it's an insurance policy that's designed to appreciate over time, basically.
Mhm.
And the second answer I would give is that Bitcoin is money. And the natural follow-on question to that is, well, what is money? And that is the question you never want to stop asking yourself. If you want to go down this rabbit hole and you want to learn and understand the world around you, and you want to see through the veils of deception to the heart of many of the problems in the world today that are misperceived as a problem with capitalism sometimes, you'll find that it's the corruption of money that has created so much pain in the world. And so I've recently started some of the recordings I've done. We've sliced and diced and put them on a YouTube channel. And that's what we named the show, is What is Money?
Mhm.
So that's the question I always encourage people to keep asking themselves. Like, I still ask myself this question. I've been studying it for years, but it keeps giving me new truth. And if you look at it in a classical economic sense, money has to exhibit 5 critical properties. It's got to be divisible, durable, recognizable, portable, and very importantly, it has to be scarce. And I'll run through those kind of quickly. So divisibility just means you can subdivide and recombine the money at different scales. So you could buy a cup of coffee or buy a house, right? So very important for transacting. Money has to be durable, so it doesn't break down over time, right? This is why metals were so useful. They didn't deteriorate over time. Has to be portable, which means you can move it across space, which metals were somewhat good at, but they're very heavy, very expensive to secure and transport. Money has to be recognizable. So when you trade with someone, both parties need to be able to verify the authenticity of that money. And for gold specifically, there were techniques to assay the value of gold, but that was actually an attack vector on gold. And that's how we got coinage and gold-backed currencies, because the government essentially stepped in and provided that certification function saying, this is 1 ounce of pure gold, or this coin is 0.5 ounces of pure gold. They were shoring up the recognizability shortcoming of gold. And then finally, money has to be scarce. And what this means is that it has to be reliably difficult to produce relative to other goods and services. Because if you can produce money easily, you can just dilute its value, right? And so that's what gold was. So of all the monetary metals historically, that was the tool that best satisfied divisibility, durability, portability, recognizability. And of the monetary metals, gold was the most scarce. And you could also think about this as the most resistant to inflation. So no matter how much time we spent trying to produce more metal, gold was the hardest metal to increase its supply. So that made it become money. And money tends towards one, like we tend to coalesce around one money because it is just a tool for executing trade more cheaply, more efficiently, more quickly. So trade is a universal phenomenon. So we only need one money, right? We're all one people. We all trade with one another. You only need one tool to facilitate that trade. And
Across
that's
the
what gold
world.
across the world.
Yeah.
But what we have today is governments that introduced paperback currencies on top of gold, again, to resolve that recognizability issue and the portability issue too, right? It's much easier to move paper or electronic representations of paper across space and time than it is to move physical gold. So this helped us transact much more quickly and it increased trade. The problem, though, is that it totally compromised the scarcity of gold. Because once governments had centralized control of it and they issued paper-backed currencies for gold, they were able to basically abuse that trust. The trust was placed in them to maintain the integrity of the currency, such as $1 is redeemable for 1 ounce of gold, for instance. And over time, they just gradually broke that integrity, right? It went from 2 to 1 to 3 to 1 to 10 to 1, culminating in
2 to 1, 3 to 1, 10 to 1, did they basically just lend out more paper than they had gold? Is that how they did that?
produced more paper than they could justify with their gold reserves.
Okay.
So it went from a truthful market function, right? You're increasing the portability and transactability of gold with paper or coins, enabling people to trade much more quickly and efficiently, right? Which increases the economization of human action, which that's the purpose of the economy. But when they start to abuse the scarcity of it, it's as if you gave someone a money printing machine, which is in fact what it was, right? And you can imagine, I think very simply, what any human with a money printing machine would do with that machine. They print money until the machine breaks. And that's what hyperinflation is. They print money until the value, it's 1 to 1, say $1 per 1 ounce of gold, goes to 10 to 1, goes to 100 to 1, goes to 1,000 to 1. All of that deception gets pushed onto society in the form of higher prices.
And so they capitalize as individuals or as an organization, they just become super wealthy. Is that their motive?
It's a mechanism for perpetual theft.
And they're stealing, and they're keeping it.
They're doing whatever they want with it, largely waging war. The central bank was originally established to finance war. When the government didn't have enough gold reserves to finance their military campaigns, they would go off the gold standard, they would temporarily suspend it, and they would increase the money supply to mobilize soldiers, and they would go to war. And whichever country won would tend to be okay, because then they could extract wealth from the defeated. But the country that loses, as we saw in Weimar Germany, they go into hyperinflation. So that's what happened with Germany, is they lost the war. They'd printed a ton of money to try and pay their way through it. But when they lost the war and then they owed reparations, they just kept printing more money, and their currency hyperinflated. And I think that's a great lesson.
The story that Robert Kiyosaki talks about, where there's a barrel of money and they'll dump the money and steal your barrel, right? Because the barrel is more. Yeah.
That's right. And by the end, and this is happening today, by the way, like in Venezuela today, there's cash in the streets, cash in the gutters. It's worthless. All right. It's like confetti. It's everywhere.
Uh-huh.
And it's an important lesson too, for people that think the US dollar can't hyperinflate, because Weimar Germany was the most powerful economy in the world at the time. And
just putting the light on. I'm listening though. It's getting dark here. Go ahead.
And it's every fiat currency has ended in hyperinflation is the moral of the story. So this is not like some specter of future possibility that we think this currency might hyperinflate. Every single one, this experiment with fiat currency has been tried, by the way, since BC China. Governments have tried to pull this off. And you could run the scheme for some time. As long as you can preserve people's belief and confidence, it's a confidence game. If you can preserve people's confidence in the currency, then you can keep siphoning wealth off of them. That's why governments try to inflict inflation slowly, right? It's a parasitic relationship. So they're extracting wealth from the host slowly. If they do it too quickly, the host will die, right? Society will collapse. This is not hyperbolic, by the way. Again, in Venezuela, when the value of currency totally collapses, how do you execute trade? You're unable to trust anyone. So it collapses this trust fabric that's built into society to the point to where things get really dicey really fast. When you can't afford to go out, or there's no way for you to go out and trade for bread. The darker side of people tends to come out.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all rooted in theft.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it's all rooted in the theft that's built into money. So money is intended to engender trust, but we have theft integrated into our monetary system today. And that's what's wrong with fiat.
Is that a human problem, or is that the technology problem? Like, are humans so easily corruptible that with any technology that has the potential to be corrupted, they will choose corruption?
Well, it seemed to be true. That seemed to be true, right? You can't, if you want to say it in a biblical sense, like man has a sinful nature, right? Like gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, lust, vengeance, all these things, you're not going to legislate those away. It's very ingrained in who we are.
Mm-hmm.
But what we can do is create systems that channel them positively. And that's what a free market effectively does. So in a free market, you are a self-owned individual. You have a financial interest to go out into the world and create better satisfactions of wants. So there's customers, people all over the world that are trying to do different things. They need their wants satisfied. If you can figure out a way to satisfy those wants, you can commercialize it and you can sell that solution into the world, and you yourself can become wealthy. So by pursuing your own self-interest, you're actually creating something selfless for the world, right? And that's what innovation is. We're building civilization in these layers of individual pursuit of self-interest. You can sell it into the market based on rules that can't be compromised, such that it benefits the world, right? And then everyone's better off because one guy figured out the solution to a problem, the whole world benefits forever. That's what the free market is. Mm-hmm. And this fiat currency phenomenon is not a free market. It only exists because they violently suppress competition, right? It's the opposite of a free market. It's a monopoly. Mm-hmm. And it suppresses price discovery. It suppresses innovation. And Bitcoin in that context is this unstoppable free market money. So it's actually channeling our greed into a game, if you will. You can think of Bitcoin as a game with rules that can't be broken, right? So we had the game of money, which settled on gold. The free market chose gold. But then banks broke those rules and bent them to their own favor. But now Bitcoin's emerging as a game with rules that can't be bent or broken. So it actually channels greed into the appreciation of Bitcoin price because your incentive is to hold it and not spend it. And by doing so, it's actually disrupting this giant system of perpetual theft we call the central bank. So you can't eliminate human sinfulness, if you want to call it that, but you can channel it in a positive direction. And that's what the free market does, and that's what Bitcoin is. It's a free market money, disrupting gold, disrupting central banking.
Why and how does it have rules that can't be changed or broken? How does that work?
So this gets into the technical aspects of Bitcoin, which can be very daunting.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. The analogy I like, and I got this from Pomp actually, is that most people have played the game of Monopoly. And the bank.
Let me just interrupt you for a second. My people don't know who Pomp is. His name is, what's his full name?
Anthony Pompliano.
Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, Anthony Pompliano, he's a Bitcoin guy and an investor in the space. And his simple way of describing what the Bitcoin blockchain is that it's like the bank when you play the game of Monopoly. Because everyone can see what the bank is doing, right? You see the money being transacted every time the bank either issues you your payment, your $200 for passing gold or passing go, sorry. Or if you get smaller change or buy a hotel, whatever you're doing, everyone sees what the bank is up to. So therefore, there's no corruption in the bank, right? In the game of Monopoly.
Right.
So it's this transparency that eliminates the corruptibility of that monetary system. And that's roughly speaking what Bitcoin is. Every computer or every, it's called a full node, or also the mining machines, they're basically checking the work of the Bitcoin blockchain. So every machine is checking every other machine's work. So instead of having one central bank that we trust and we can't see behind the central bank, right? The Fed has never been audited. We don't know who owns it. They issue a 6% dividend to those undisclosed shareholders. We don't know what criteria they use for deciding how many dollars to produce. We don't know how many dollars they produce. They put out data, but we can't audit it, so we don't know. It's just a trust game. We're just blindly trusting in the central bank. Bitcoin flips it all on its head. It's don't trust, verify is the ethos of Bitcoin. So every computer becomes its own central bank. I can verify all balances from now into the beginning of the history of Bitcoin on my computer.
Do you get paid to do that? Will you make money if you're in? Are you incentivized to check the balances?
So that's what Bitcoin mining is, which some people may have heard of. Is it there's another game essentially being played where these computing power is being allocated to the Bitcoin network to try and solve a mathematical puzzle. And the game becomes more difficult the more players are involved, which is very interesting. It makes Bitcoin kind of a living money. And it's, again, basically by channeling the greed, the individual self-interest of miners into security of the network, you're turning this individual self-interest into the collective self-interest of the monetary system. And that they are paid. So every 10 minutes, Bitcoin, the blockchain, by the way, is each block is a group of transactions. And that group of transactions is sealed every 10 minutes. So each group of transactions is then appended to another block of transactions, and so on and so forth. And you can verify that all the way to the beginning of Satoshi Nakamoto launching the Genesis block. And those miners are competing at the ceiling of each block. A new batch of Bitcoin is issued, and they're competing for that batch of Bitcoin. So there's a economic game being played where they are rewarded for providing security to the network. And that's the free market principles that are integrated into Bitcoin. Those are the rules that can't be broken. So by this distributed network of machines, all checking each other's work, none of them can break the rules. They're all playing this sound game. The emergent property of that is the hardest or most honest money we've ever had. It's a purely transparent, honest monetary system that is disruptive to the opacity and deception of central banking.
And I'm going to simplify it for my people. And if you're a Bitcoiner and watching this, I'm sorry, but for my people, because we haven't even talked about this yet, it's essentially a digital and correct me if I'm wrong here, if I say anything inaccurate, but it's a mathematical equation that you own, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And one Bitcoin today is worth $13,000 as of right now, right? And you own this basically etheric number, these digits that only you can own and can't be replaceable. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say to actually hold the Bitcoin is to hold a private key, which is basically, you can think of it as your password or your own secret. And that secret lets you unlock value on the Bitcoin network. Mm-hmm. And so you might have 10 Bitcoin, which is 10 Bitcoin worth of secrets that you can spend, right? But no one can see the Bitcoin, but no one else knows who owns it, and no one else can move it or transact with it, only the owner.
And you're doing that with a seed key of 16 words, right?
Yeah, you can. There's a number of ways to chop it up. Yeah, 12 words, 24 words.
Okay. And I just want to touch on, like, a lot of people have questions of, what if I lose the key, or what if this, and all of their potential mind concerns of, is the key safe, right? People are always looking for reasons not to invest in Bitcoin. The more and more I talk about it with friends, the more and more rebuttals I get around, is this part safe? Is that part safe? What about that part? And what can go wrong here? Can you, as you talk about these small themes, can you talk about why it's totally safe and hack proof, and why it requires human idiocy to lose your money?
Yeah. You're absolutely correct. All of the potential error or risk of loss is really at the human level, right? So if you lose your security seed, your private keys, then your Bitcoin's gone, and there's no one you can call to get that back. And a lot of people aren't comfortable with that level of responsibility. But the other thing is that it's not just like you have to hold it, and if something happens to you, it's gone. Bitcoin introduces a number of unique ways to custody it. Because it's just information, you can take that private key you can chop it into 4 different pieces and put it in 4 different places in the world. And then you could chop it in 4 other pieces and back it up in 4 different places in the world. You can do these collaborative custody arrangements called multi-signature. So you could actually put it into a vault that requires 2 out of 3 keys to unlock, right? So you could have you and your wife, and you can get very unique and very customized with these custody arrangements. And there's a number of service providers out there that will help you too. Which if you're investing in Bitcoin at an institutional level, you're using like a Wall Street approved, SEC approved custodian. So like Michael Saylor that recently bought 38,000 Bitcoin, like they're with a institutional custodian. And if you're absolutely correct that you've got to be very responsible. You have to be very thoughtful in how you're custodying your Bitcoin. But if it's done correctly, then there's basically no risk of loss. The network itself, and a very easy way to think about this is how many data breaches have we heard about from centralized companies, right? I mean, credit card information has been stolen from even Equifax, right? Equifax, Home Depot, like every big name corporation, because they're a centralized entity, a hacker only needs to breach one wall to get that data, right? Now, there may be many security schemes within that one organization, but the point is there's a single point of failure. If a hacker can penetrate it, they can get the data, right? Or they can get the credit card, whatever it is. Bitcoin takes that dynamic and it flips it on its head. By being decentralized, you would have to crack 51% of the collective computing power of the entire network, which Bitcoin already today, even in its infancy, which is still very small, is the most powerful computing network in the history of humanity. Wow. We've never had so much computing power allocated towards one function on anything, and it's exponentially larger than anything we've ever had. And today the whole network's worth, let's call it $2.25 billion, 225 around $1 billion. The value of cracking an Equifax, right, getting a few million customers' credit card information is call it a few million bucks, right? If that, maybe a few $100,000 that black market operatives would want to buy this information, right? So the incentive for that was small enough, but a hacker still cracked it, right? Mm-hmm. The incentive today to crack the Bitcoin network, and has been for a long time, is $225 billion. It is the ultimate hacker honeypot. But that proves how impenetrable it is, right? You can't crack it because it's so simplistic, frankly. You're just maintaining this ledger of transactions and this fixed money supply. So there's very little what people in Bitcoin call attack surface. And you can think about this as the more convoluted and more complex or more feature set you add to a software, the more points of attack there are, right? Because you just think that the software code gets bigger and more complicated. There's unforeseen little loopholes or what have you that can be exploited. But Bitcoin is tiny. Like the core code to Bitcoin is crystalline and small. There's no attack surface, or very, very minimized attack surface, you would say. And it's been operating flawlessly for 11 years. So we have this asset. It stores, 200 some odd billion dollars of market value. It's had perfect uptime. It's never been cracked. It's maintained its 21 million supply cap. It's the most secure computing network in human history. So, people are waking up to this. And when you come to see it that way, you realize that it's like the old adage, with great power comes great responsibility. With Bitcoin, you can be your own central bank, which is the most powerful institution in the world. So with that power comes a great deal of responsibility. So maybe it's not for everyone, but eventually it will be for everyone, because all of these other systems are designed to collapse. And you don't want to be caught, swimming naked, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. So, and the other things like Mt. Gox, just to clarify to my people, there are things that have been hacked within Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin network has never been hacked. So people have trusted their money with a central spin off of Bitcoin. a centralized spinoff of Bitcoin, but never actually Bitcoin, right? So these are two very different things, just to inform people.
Absolutely right. And that's back to the centralized model, right? You're not trusting Bitcoin, you're trusting that institution who, by the way, if you say you have Bitcoin with Coinbase, you don't have Bitcoin.
Right.
You have an IOU. Coinbase owes you Bitcoin, and you better hope they send you that Bitcoin. But what you can do is withdraw, you can claim that IOU, withdraw your Bitcoin into a self-custody or a collaborative custody model. And then you're immune to centralized security failures.
Right. Okay. Awesome. So do you have anything else you want to say, or should I just start going into questions here? Anything coming to mind intuitively?
Well, the big thing, I'll mention a couple of things actually. So one, the most important part of Bitcoin, in my opinion, is that it disrupts the perpetual warfare we saw in the 20th century. And for a little bit of data on that, and this is data published by the UN, the death per capita in warfare quadrupled in the 20th century. And as Ron Paul has this famous quote, he says, "It's no coincidence that the century of total war and the century of central banking were in the same century." So before the global implementation of central banks, when countries go to war, which is a very expensive activity, the most expensive activity in the world, right? You're mobilizing people and capital and weaponry. You're shipping it way far away, as far away as you can in many cases, and you're laying waste to other people's capital and people. So it's you're mobilizing capital to destroy capital. It is the most wasteful, inhumane, atrocious activity humanity can engage in. It's anti-economic beyond imagination. And when countries used to engage in warfare, what would typically happen is each country raises an army, they go to war. One of them hits the bottom first in terms of being able to finance it, right? Someone runs out of money because it's very expensive. And then they cut a deal. They strike an armistice, or they sign a treaty. There's some arrangement made in lieu of armed conflict because they simply run out of money. You can't keep doing it, right? So a country loses by virtue of financing versus, winning out, we'd say, in warfare. But with the implementation of central banking, governments are no longer restricted to their own coffers or their own savings in waging warfare because they can just print more money. And when you print money, you're siphoning wealth off of your entire citizenry. So everyone that's forced to use that money is being stolen from a little bit, right? So you're sucking this wealth off of your entire productive economy, right? So in the US, we have 300 some odd million people. Instead of the government, which is a few million people, being able to fund that thing themselves, they can now suck value off of everyone, and they can do it without permission. They do it invisibly, right? People don't understand how the system works. So prices just go up every year. I don't know. That's the way it works. And I'm losing my job, and healthcare is more expensive. But what's happening is that's the infliction of an invisible tax on people. And those resources are being channeled into warfare. So that's the most important part of Bitcoin, is that it disrupts this stealth funding mechanism for perpetual warfare used by central banks for the past century. And I think in that sense, as the author of a really great book I recommend everyone to read called The Bitcoin Standard, his name's Safety Amoose, says that on a Bitcoin standard, there's no World War III. You can't fund it. If you put everyone on a Bitcoin standard, no one can print Bitcoin. All of a sudden, the government needs to show up at your door with a tax bill saying like, hey, we're trying to go to war in the Middle East. Would you please sign us a check for $50,000 per household? All right, which is, I think, the cost of the war in the Middle East over the past decade in the US comes out around $40,000 per US household. So you can imagine the difference in being able to print money and steal wealth invisibly versus having to show up and give someone a bill that explicitly says you owe $40,000 for us blowing shit up in the Middle East. And how much it would change, right? People would be, it's out of sight, out of mind, right? If you see it, and you realize that this is your skin in the game, you're being stolen from to finance this thing, you're going to be much more resistant to it. So that's a very, very important aspect of Bitcoin. And then one
And
other
the
thing I would
theory is, and just to tie that, the theory is that if they can't fund it, they're going to choose not to go to war. That's what you're saying?
not even that they won't, they may choose to go to war all they want,
Uh-huh.
but at some point they're just not going to be able to fund it.
So it
Right? You'll go to
reduces the
war.
longevity of a war for it.
You simply have less access to resources to wage war.
Okay.
You couldn't, if there's no money printer and you can't inflate the currency and you can't tax 300 million people invisibly,
Mhm.
then all of a sudden your coffers or your access to capital goes from, 100 down to say 2% of what it was. So they could go to war, but then
But
the
they've been
duration of that war shrinks.
right. Okay.
And we start to look like we did in the 19th century and prior to there was no world war, right, until the 20th century. Why is that? Because of the global implementation of central banking. Wars before that were brief. There were little skirmishes. People go to war, fight over food, territory, whatever. One of them runs out of money. The other one, they sign a deal, and that's it. They get back to business, which is the productive economy. But with central banking implemented, countries could go to war forever. There's no bill. They just keep printing more money until one of the currencies hyperinflates, right? And that's what happened to Germany. They lost the war, currency hyperinflated. And hyperinflated twice, by the way. They lost 2 world wars. So that humanitarian aspect of Bitcoin is what I think is the most important narrative, because no one likes war. Who the fuck supports war? Nobody. Right? So the fact that Bitcoin, the way I like to describe it is that it's disruptive to gold, and gold is what underpins government. So it's disruptive to centralized government, not localized government, centralized government, which is in turn disruptive to global warfare. So that's where I think Bitcoin is very of just paramount importance. Mm-hmm. And then something that, this is very tangential to that, but in my own personal life, something that's been important. I know you said your audience is a lot of health focused people that may have had chronic illness and whatnot.
Yeah.
I actually suffered from a autoimmune disease for a number of years, and it was mild. I was fortunate. It was mostly just like a cosmetic thing. But I went to the doctors and did all the things, and they're like, yeah, it's just a thing that happens. People have to live with it. We don't really know the solution for it. And, luckily for you, it's mild, so it'll be okay. And I was very dissatisfied with this answer. Can you hear me?
Yep, I'm here.
Sorry, my internet was cutting out.
Yep.
I was very dissatisfied with this answer, and I started doing some research on diet and whatnot. And long story short, I tried a lot of different things like veganism and keto and this and that and the other, but it was actually through the Bitcoin community, which is a very interesting group of people, very diverse walks of life, but all very liberty focused, very independent, very intelligent, that I discovered the carnivore diet. And the carnivore diet I am almost completely free of my autoimmune disease today, like 99.9% gone. And I haven't even followed, I could be better about the carnivore diet. I've been a little wishy-washy, but I'm getting better and better. And I discovered that through interacting with Bitcoin. So I really think it might sound a little silly, but Bitcoin in a lot of ways healed me. Mm. And it's not just a physical thing too, because another aspect of Bitcoin is that we don't understand how much our character and morality and our actions are shaped by living in a system where money loses value every year. It actually incentivizes us to be more short-term thinking.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Like, I need to spend this money today because it's not going to be worth as much tomorrow. So I'm a consumer, right? I'm eating sugar, I'm drinking alcohol, I'm buying big screen TVs, whatever. I'm living for the moment. I'm very hedonistic overall. And this is a whole rabbit hole in itself, but just to touch on it a little bit, like when you operate on a money or interact with a money that appreciates every year, all of a sudden your time horizon expands wildly. Because I don't need, like, why would I buy the big screen TV this year when I know I can get it cheaper next year? So all of a sudden I started to people, and this is a common phenomenon Bitcoiners report, is they say it lowers your time preference, which is an Austrian economic way of saying it increases your time horizon, makes you a longer term thinker. And people become more health focused, people become more family oriented, people become more environmentally conscious, people become more outspoken against government, right? And so it has this really interesting character shaping effect on us. And I think that, I mentioned the importance of its disruptive potential, but I think it also has this really fascinating impact on people at an interpersonal level.
Mm-hmm.
And I've, as a result of all these things, I consider Bitcoin to be my life's work. And it's just very important for the world on a lot of levels.
Amazing. I agree with all of that as far as how it's touched my life personally. I mean, Bitcoin hasn't healed me. I went through a very, very intense journey. I don't think you know anything about it, but long and short of it is that I spent like 3.5 years in a suicidal state. I almost died. I had severe mercury poisoning. I lived in the Amazon jungle for almost an entire year, drinking ayahuasca, dove
Wow.
deep with all different kinds of shamanic techniques and fasting. I would fast for 12, 13 days at a time and went
Wow.
through deep transformational work over a 4-year period of time before finding Bitcoin. But detox ended up being the thing that transformed my well-being. Detoxification of the body, heavy metals, parasites, cleansing the system, cleansing the colon. I'm sure you've heard about this, cleansing the liver. But what Bitcoin has done for me is totally taken me out of any and all short-term thinking. If I'm going to buy something, I used to buy things as soon as my business started doing well. I bought things that I didn't need every day, to get you get that little high from owning something that is somewhat helpful along this short-term path. And now I think if I'm just going to, why would I do that when I can put this into my end of the galaxy savings account as
Right.
what's his name? Michael Saylor
Stay
said,
there.
right?
Yeah.
That is going to appreciate in massive ways over the next decade, right?
Exactly.
And so it has created a level of peace and security and safety for me, feeling like I have this nest that I can rest on for eternity, really. I mean, I don't really plan on selling it ever.
Yeah. And once you get there, that's the common theme. People are like, I'm just going to hold it forever. You start to think beyond your own life. You start to look at Bitcoin as something that can secure wealth for intergenerationally for you, right? And the Native Americans said they used to consider 7 generations in advance when they made decisions. Like they're deciding how they're going to organize themselves, but they're not thinking like us today. They're thinking 7 generations into the future. So they had this even though they're maybe considered primitive in many ways, they had a very low time preference, very long time horizon. And they had a lot of happiness and fulfillment amongst them, right?
And sustainability.
Yeah. And sustainability. Look at corporate America. We literally think quarter to quarter. Quarterly earnings, quarterly earnings, quarterly earnings. We have total disregard, like dump the pollution in the river,
Yep.
like cut down the rainforest, burn it. It doesn't matter. Just maximize quarterly earnings.
Yep.
And externalize all that cost onto the future. So I think we get into like the heady elements of Bitcoin where it changes.
Perfect. Yeah, that's the perfect element to get into for my channel, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It changes. I put it like this, and it's maybe something to ponder for a while. Try to pack a lot into a little bit of words, but
yeah.
Bitcoin is changing the world profoundly by being unchangeable.
Yes.
So we have this game for the first time in history, this money, this system, this human organizing principle that can't change. We can't break the rules. So all you can do now is play the game well, right? So instead of all these systems throughout history have been like, hey, here are the rules. Which this is what capitalism is, right? Try to keep it simple.
Yeah.
Rule of law, So you and I can trade, and if we have a dispute, we can settle that dispute non-violently, right? We can appeal to the court, and we can have that, let that settle the dispute versus blowing each other up or whatever. Private property rights, which means that whatever you invest your time in to create, whether you're producing a good, providing a service, creating knowledge, you own that, right? And you can trade it with other self-owned people that have created the same thing. That's how we create value in the economy. And then finally is honest money, which is just the money that we can reliably transact with. We know it's going to hold its value across time. Those are the three tenets of true capitalism. But what we have in the world today, we have a rule of law that's somewhat stable, especially in the US. Like that's why it's such an attractive place to invest, because you know you can settle disputes via the rule of law, which is rooted in English common law tradition. Like there's a lot of history behind that. And it's, we'll say it's not completely uncorrupt, but it's pretty good. Mm-hmm. Private property rights, however, are constantly violated by monetary inflation. So if we consider that money is the asset that lets you have access to any other asset, right? Because you can buy anything with money. That's what money is. It's the most liquid, most tradable asset. If there's one group that can produce that money that everyone else is forced to use, they are violating the private property rights of everyone else, right? I'm creating money that you can't create that I can use to buy your shit. So I'm stealing from you. Like it's not, before Bitcoin, people used to think it was hyperbolic to say inflation was theft, but now I think the world's really waking up. It's like, no, this is flat out theft. There's no other use for it at all. There's no equitable benefit to an economy whatsoever for printing money. It's purely a mechanism for compromising private property rights. And when you do that, it just breaks down. I'm sorry, I forgot how we started the question. I was saying
okay.
Yeah.
I can't. I had you on my show for you to go on rants. That's why I had.
Awesome. It just breaks down like the integrity of society, because again, we are more than the sum of our parts working together. That's what the economy is, right? You make hats faster than I make boots. We both focus. You focus on hats. I focus on boots. We trade. We have both improved our position. We're playing a positive sum game by trading with one another. But the rub is the rules through which we trade and interact must be unchangeable, right? If they're changeable and they can be bent and manipulated, all of a sudden our level of trust deteriorates. So I think that was it, is Bitcoin, by being unchangeable, is changing the world. So we have these rules that can't be bent or broken. And as one of my mentors told me once, he said, when the rules are firmly set for all to see, smart people will play the game, right? But when the rules are changing, people are on the sidelines. People don't trust. You're more defensive, skeptical, and we mitigate the economic prowess of trade because people aren't trading as much. So everything we're producing, we're not realizing our full potential. We don't know what our full potential is because we have kept playing games that the rules could be bent or broken. And now we have a game that is uncompromisable. And another way to put this, and I'll leave it at this, and the alchemists talk about this. This goes actually really deep. So the aim of alchemy was not to produce gold, actually. It was to produce the lapis philosophorum, which is the philosopher's stone. And this was the idea that it was basically the incorruptible substance. So something that could turn lead into gold. They were aiming to produce something that embodied the principles of Christ, by the way, which was honesty and honoring the sovereignty of the individual, but finding it in a material substance. And it was said to be that this philosopher's stone, would be the antidote to tyranny in the world. So they were seeking an incorruptible substance to cure the corruption in the world. And now, for the first time in history, we have produced an incorruptible substance, and that is 21 million Bitcoin. That number cannot be corrupted, changed, modified. The rules cannot be bent or broken. And yeah, that's the furthest down the rabbit hole I've been so far. So
Mercury, salt, sulfur, right? Isn't that one of their formulas for creating the Philosopher's Stone?
I don't
Mercury,
know.
salt, and sulfur. Yeah.
I'll say I don't know a lot about alchemy, and the extent of my knowledge has been from reading Jordan Peterson,
Uh-huh.
and a lot of his knowledge came from Carl Jung. But people that are interested in that topic, I would say pick up Maps of Meaning. It's a very hard book. The portion on alchemy is probably in the last third of the book, but it's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just some hocus pocus try to turn lead into gold. It was proto science, by the way. Alchemy evolved into science, basically. There were people that thought they could go out and find redemptive knowledge by experimenting in the laboratory of nature. And those methods that they developed, the alchemical methodologies, became the scientific method. So like, and this is not too unrecent of a change. Like Isaac Newton, right? Newtonian physics, and he was in charge of the English central bank. He was an alchemist. He spent most of his life studying alchemy. So it's only the past few hundred years that we've developed this notion that alchemy is a bunch of crazy people.
Right. There's a lot of things that hold a lot of sound integrity that a lot of people just write off as sort of new age or nonsense. People just want to look at science, but I think that life is so much more complex than science. And I think science finds its way after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like people do mushrooms and see alternate realities, and then they find the science afterwards of how to prove that was helpful, right, for depression, or what the alternate reality was, or what chemicals were changed, right? So go ahead.
Well,
Yeah.
they say that, software engineering itself like arose from people that experimented with the psychedelics, right? I mean, Steve Jobs was big on this as a recent example, but even going further back, science has become a religion today. Like people think if it's not scientifically true, it's not true. But science just eliminates our individual biases, right? So that's what the scientific method is. Like we're going to verify this thing as many times as possible. And anything that we can't verify, we discard. So it's very good at getting to an objective truth, but there are things in reality that are not objective, right? Economics, by the way, and human action is an inherently subjective study. And this is where I would point you to Austrian economics. You can't establish human aims, goals, motivations in a purely scientific way. It's just not possible. It's too complex and there's too many variables. So I look at it as kind of two sides of the same coin. There's objective reality, but then I think a lot of the ancient and religious texts and the wisdom traditions point to the subjective side, the side of reality that can't be compressed into objective truth. And they're important, right? They both interact and relate.
The merging of the eagle and the condor may be an example of that, right? Like ancient medicine, ancient wisdom and medicine and shamanism merged with Western medicine, right? And when the eagle and the condor will learn to fly together, that's when the world will change, right? That's when we'll restore integrity and health to the planet. That's a old philosophy.
I've never heard that. That's cool.
Yeah, and it's a Native American, I think, philosophy, or I don't know the right word for it, but yeah.
No.
So I have questions, but what are you on time? What are you feeling?
Oh, I got time.
Okay,
roll.
Cool. All right. So why is Bitcoin unchanged? Is the code is set in stone? It cannot be changed by even if someone is magnificently brilliant and just blows everyone out of the water with their computer programming skills, they can't change Bitcoin.
Yeah, so this is relatively complex. So I'll try to make it simple. So there's two layers of Bitcoin. There's the protocol layer, which is the technology itself. And then there's the social layer, which are the people. You can think of the protocol layer as the rules of the game, right? It's enforcing whatever rules are set at the social layer. And the social layer is people choosing the rules that are best for them, right? And it turns out in the game of money, the rules that are best are you can't counterfeit my money, you can't steal my money, you can't inflate my money. And Bitcoin already has these rules programmed in. So it's basically perfected the rules of money. So at the social layer, and this has already been attempted, by the way, you could try to change the rules of Bitcoin, and you could campaign the community, right? The Bitcoin community, be like, hey, don't play that game anymore. Come play my game, Bitcoin Cash. We've got bigger blocks and whatever. And you can maybe do that. You could have some success at the social layer. Say you get 50% of the people to fork off, and all of a sudden you've got two competing Bitcoins. You got Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin. The rub is that when you execute a fork like this and you split the community, the most efficient strategy is still just to hold Bitcoin, because when you fork the community, the protocol layer forks with it. And so if you were holding Bitcoin in the Bitcoin Cash fork, you got 1-to-1 Bitcoin Cash for Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm holding 100 Bitcoin, they fork the community, I get 100 Bitcoin Cash allocated to me as well, right? And so now it's a free market experiment. These two monies are competing with one another. And whichever one starts to outcompete tends to win totally, because again, money just is one, it's a single purpose technology. Mm-hmm. It's just whatever helps us best trade across time and space, right? That's what gold was. It was the single winner in the market for money. And when that happens, one starts to win over the other. So it tends to win out totally. And you, as the player of that game, again, your best strategy was just to hold the whole time. So we saw this play out with Bitcoin Cash. It forked off. It was a much smaller, it was like, say, sub 10% of the social layer that makes up Bitcoin forked off. I made Bitcoin Cash. But then since that, this was in late 17, I believe, the value of Bitcoin Cash has collapsed relative to Bitcoin. Like it's way down, like 90+%.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that is just the market signaling to us what the consensus has been. And the consensus was to stick with original Bitcoin, because another way to think about this is that Bitcoin already perfected the properties of money, right? We go back to what is money: divisibility, durability, portability, recognizability, and scarcity. Bitcoin is digital, right? So it's infinitely divisible. You can break it down and recombine it as much as you want. It only goes out to 100 million units right now, but that can be upgraded. It's infinitely durable because distributed information does not decompose, right? Like the internet does not decompose, right? It's constantly revivified, it's updated, the information is everywhere and nowhere. It's basically immortal. It's infinitely portable, clearly. You can move it at the speed of light, can't get much faster than that. It's infinitely recognizable because you can audit yourself and all the transactions and all of history all the time. Mm-hmm. And then Bitcoin already perfected scarcity. It's absolutely scarce, right? There's no inflation, there's no counterfeiting. There's 21 million, and that's it forever. So it's as if, Saylor tweeted this out the other day too. I thought it was interesting. It was a quote by someone, I can't remember their name, but said I'm going to paraphrase. The job of the artist is to take away everything that's not important, and whatever is left is the masterpiece, right? So we're taking away all the excess things that you don't need, and whatever's left is the thing that's really important, the work of art. And Satoshi basically did that with Bitcoin. He already took away the divisibility issue, took away the durability. It moves at the speed of light, so it took away any importability, and he took away all inflation, and he made it absolutely scarce. Again, we've never had anything in history that everyone knows with 100% certainty has an absolute fixed supply. It's never happened. Can't even say that for gold, right? Because anything physical, we can just allocate more time to produce more of it. We could all say, flip a switch. If you could flip a magical switch and make everyone go mine gold, we could increase the gold supply tomorrow. We know that. You can't do that with Bitcoin. You could flip a switch right now and allocate every computing resource in the world to go mine Bitcoin. It will still issue Bitcoin on a fixed and diminishing supply curve. So it's something that can't be changed or corrupted. And I think that's why it can't be disrupted. You can go and compete with it all you want. I'm not dogmatic about this, But I think what I've learned in studying the history of money and seeing the Bitcoin Cash fork, the failure of it play out in real time, tells me that Bitcoin has won this race.
Mhm.
When a network gets to this size, $200+ billion, it represents 90% of the daily float. It's won. It's over. Like there's no conceivable way to disrupt it. I don't want to say it's impossible because no one knows the future and whatever, but it seems that for the same reasons we only have one analog gold, we're only going to have one digital gold, and that race has been won by Bitcoin.
What if we don't want Bitcoin to be money per se, like because right now the way money is taxed is, as Saylor talks about, it's hostile towards
Yeah.
Bitcoin, right? So we want it to be a store of value, but not necessarily money. Could there be another cryptocurrency that would do a better job at that? Or like, I
Yeah.
guess what
So,
I'm saying is, what I'm asking you is, like, do, what do we want Bitcoin to ultimately succeed at?
well, that's a great question. And we, right? We,
Yeah.
the market
Mhm.
decides.
Mhm.
So I can't tell you like this is what Bitcoin needs to be, or
Right.
no one can tell you. Everyone can tell you, but no one can tell you.
Right.
Right. So,
Yeah.
um, and yeah, to the point where the existing tax code is very hostile to Bitcoin because you have to realize capital gains at every transaction. So that's again interfacing with the legacy financial system. But what you can do is, so the question is, could a cryptocurrency satisfy that niche? Absolutely. Something could be um, more useful in day-to-day transactions, which a lot of these things already are, right? If you want to look at
Cash. Yeah.
Ethereum, Litecoin, like they're all designed to be faster, cheaper, better than Bitcoin. But what they give up to get this higher transactability is security of the network. There's less a settlement assurance. There's more volatility. Like they're moons orbiting a planet, right? They're just very small.
Yeah.
Um, I actually think, like nature, it will, and this is just an opinion, I don't know, but I think it will actually evolve in layers. So we see today these higher layer protocols like the Lightning Network, Liquid being built on top of Bitcoin. So Lightning, for instance, essentially allows you, I'll give you the simple analogy. It's as if you and I can open a Lightning channel together. So I can put a Bitcoin into this channel, you put a Bitcoin into this channel. We have this transaction channel between us. That's sort of like an abacus, like a digital abacus. We can slide these beads back and forth based on how we transact. And then either one of us has the option to close that channel at any time and settle to the Bitcoin blockchain. So we pick up a lot of transaction throughput. It's like unlimited transaction throughput. We can settle with finality instantly, basically. And we also pick up some privacy benefits. It's it's anonymized, but we give up a little bit of the trust minimization because we're not settling every transaction to the Bitcoin blockchain. So if something's wrong with Lightning software, then we could get messed up, right? So it's still kind of experimental. But I think that's how it will evolve, that we will settle transactions in higher layer protocols that are faster and more private, and then we'll periodically settle to the Bitcoin blockchain. But that should be a relatively small fraction of Bitcoin's total market cap, right? Like that's what gold is. Money needs to store value first, and then you can settle at the margins with it.
Mm.
Um, so I think that will be the path that it takes. And then the other thing about Lightning Network is, so it's you and I with that Lightning channel opened up, and then it's everyone all over the world. So we route through these channels. So it's like people will route through us that are connected to other channels, and it just forms this whole lattice of transaction interconnection worldwide. And I think there's going to be a lot of demand for that because it's incredibly fast. It's like it has theoretically unlimited transactions, and it's private. And I think that's the way the world will go. People want to settle quickly, and people want to settle. Uh, people want to trade privately, right? No
Yeah.
one wants all the information broadcast all over the world.
So I when I first got into this world, I was investing in Ethereum and was a diehard Ethereum fan, but I didn't understand it at all. I just kind of saw the smart contract thing that you saw and was like, yes, this is
Yeah.
the future. And I recently, well, not recently, like a year ago or so, maybe 8 months ago, I don't know, 10 months ago, realized that Bitcoin is going to be the ultimate crypto asset. And thanks to my friend who actually who introduced you to me, he educated me about Bitcoin is its own thing, crypto is the rest, right?
Yeah.
People say cryptocurrency, they're talking about this whole other world. Bitcoin is its own unique animal. Do you agree with that?
100%.
Uh,
You could say, rough analogy here, but Bitcoin is like the internet. Alternative crypto assets, which is everything else, are like intranets. I don't know if the audience even remembers those. They kind of, most of them died, right?
yeah, yeah.
Um, which companies thought they could have their own private internet and control it, and this would be our little permissioned internet. Well, those all died because you lose all the value of the whole internet, right? All this liquidity, accessibility, experimentation. So I think that's a similar dynamic that's going to play out. Most of these things will die. Maybe some of them are meaningful, but Bitcoin is much more like the internet.
Okay. All right, let's take it a little esoteric here. So I understand that Bitcoin holds so much truth, so much integrity. It's changing the world by being unchangeable, right? My curiosity and my question is, does the world appreciate truth? Because it feels like most people like to live in lies and like to live in absolute bogus reality where their power is being given away, where they give away their power, where they ask a doctor for how long am I going to live, doc? And I'm curious about, will the truth ultimately prevail, right? Because that's my only concern with Bitcoin. My ultimate concern with Bitcoin is, yeah, it's all of these things. I fucking see the truth in this. I am 90% of my wealth is in this thing. Right? But 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 does the world believe in truth?
That's a great question. A couple of things come to mind. This is another one of those quotes that I think about a lot, that you can think about probably forever. I think it's pretty profound. And I don't know who said it, so sorry. Human nature is like water. It takes the shape of its container. So when you mention that, like, most people today seem like they enjoy the living and, giving up power and being deceived, or what, just living fiat reality, as I would call it.
Yeah.
I agree. But I think that a lot of that character, and I've experienced this in my own life, is shaped by the monetary system you're working in. Before I got into Bitcoin, I told you I was a career CFO. I had, like, whatever, big salary and stock options and the money and the travel and blah, 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 blah. And I was in that game. It was fun at a hedonic level, but unfulfilling at a deeper level. And I have experienced changes in my own life by, going deeper into this domain, and I guess lowering my time preference. And, I don't drink anymore. I've, much more focused on my health and my family and all these things. So I think that those changes can happen in just a few years for someone that's really focused. And I've seen, it's not just me, again, similar changes in all kinds of people in the Bitcoin community. I think it can also happen equally as quickly, if not more quickly, at a larger level, right? By playing a different game, people become different. It reshapes the player, because different qualities and different strategies are necessary to succeed in that game. And that's what we are, right? We're life. We adapt, we change, we evolve. So I think that even though the world today may have a disregard for truth, or maybe they're just numb to truth, right? They've been so
Yeah.
detached from it. I'm not exactly sure, but um, seems kind of like it's almost like a toxicity of some kind, right? It's people are sick, right? You're morally sick in a way that you may not even understand, right? If you're I'm in a job, I'm working, I'm making money, like I'm by all definitions on paper very successful and whatever, but something's missing, you may not understand that you're actually uh, you're being hurt by the game that you're playing almost. So you think of it kind of like that. And truth, man, I truth can take a beating, but I just think it is the most powerful thing in the universe, frankly. And a number of ways to think about this. One is, for pragmatic purposes, truth is just an accurate depiction of reality, right?
A consent,
So,
what most people agree to. Yeah.
consensus, yeah, and that's kind of what like science is trying to get at. It's trying to eliminate. I see the world this way, you see the world that way, but we experiment across all of our perspectives, and we eliminate all the distortions of bias, right? And experimental difference and all this, and whatever's left, right? We're carving away the block again. Whatever's left is science, right? That is the body of knowledge. And the market itself does that as well, right? Like we're that's what price discovery is. If you ever heard someone in markets talking about price discovery, that's everyone trading everything, and based on the prevailing supply and demand dynamics, a price emerges for something all the time. It's constantly changing, right? Price of beef might be this or that based on supply and demand. And so what the market is it's zeroing in on truth. It's the collective consensus about what does this thing trade for, right? Based on how much of it there is and based on how much of it is being demanded by everyone at large. So the market provides this truth finding function. And I think that the dynamics of the free market have been exponentially accelerated in the digital age. Because again, another way the American pragmatists describe truth as the end of inquiry. So we're all making inquiries into the nature of reality, our business, our competitors, each other, ourselves, as we experiment and trade. And whatever is at the end of that chain of inquiry is said to be truth. All right. So if there's a simple example I like to give is like people like to dig holes, right? You need to dig holes to plant trees or do whatever. So what is the truth of hole digging? The truth of hole digging is a shovel, right? We have tried to figure out how to dig holes as quickly and easily as possible. And through all these countless iterations, we figured out this thing needs to be this long, it needs to have a handle shaped like this, a head needs to be pointed, needs a little gap to press your foot on to dig the hole. Like that is the knowledge structure. It's the physical manifestation of the knowledge structure that represents mankind's collective wisdom about hole digging. So we figure this out by interacting and trading. And in the digital age, we interact and trade faster than ever, right? What are we doing right now? We're bending time and space to have a conversation, exchanging ideas in a way that was totally impossible 10 years ago, even. So this thing is like the digital age is something I'm still trying to get my head around it. I think we're in a renaissance, honestly. I think in 500, say 100 years from now, we'll look back and be like, industrial age, information age, but actually in a grander sense, we had like the Renaissance in the visual arts, right? A lot of that was driven by the utility of zero, which I wrote about in one of my
Tell us
pieces.
about that. I have that as a question. Tell us about that.
That's a whole rabbit
Oh,
hole
okay.
unto itself, but it's the gist of it being a zero-based number system gave us a much better framework for trade and quantification of the world, right? So we again, speaking a common language or playing a common game. There are all these different forms of math competing all over the world, but the Hindu Arabic number system that discovered zero defeated all of them because it was the most pragmatically useful in a nutshell. And there's a whole lot behind that, but I think that the digital age is one of those type of transformational events, which interestingly enough is very connected to zero because all wireless technologies necessitate imaginary numbers which require a zero to get to. So it's like it's been this long chain of inquiry, right? And we're closer to the truth than ever, and we have now this substrate to find truth faster than ever. So that's what I think is happening in the world right now. What all these protests and uprisings and the intellectual dark web, right? Like people are the institutions of the 20th century that could sustain themselves on deception and just under the veil of authority, right? Like this is the way it is because we said so. That shit doesn't hold up anymore because people, these largely government, but also other organization institutions, they cannot stand up to sustained intellectual inquiry. And that sustained intellectual inquiry has just had gasoline dumped all over it, right? In the form of the internet and digital tools. Like we can just communicate and think around, collectively think around things faster than ever. And I think that old models are just being burned. And that's what we're in the middle of right now. We're in the fires of the digital age.
I agree. And I have this theory that there's going to be a split in humanity where, you know, people are going to continue to give their power away and stay in that sort of lifestyle. And then other people are going to claim their sovereignty on many levels, not just digitally, but also on an animal, etheric, emotional intelligence. Like they're going to learn their own software and hardware of who they are without the influence of, without outside influence and conditioning, right? Deconditioning all of the nonsense that we were branded with as a kid. Because my theory is that most people don't even have original thoughts, you know, like most people are actually just, their calculator has been so hijacked that they're just, you know, replaying some sort of soundbite, right?
Right.
But anyway, let's say all this is true. It doesn't have to be. Can Bitcoin be wildly successful with a lot of the population staying in a place of giving their power away? Like, do we need the masses to adopt this, or can we just have a small percentage of the population be all in?
Well, that's the interesting thing. So there's this digital age, right? The windows of perception have been exponentially multiplied. So we're able, the market is able to zero in on truth much more quickly, right? And the truth of money, by the way, was gold. Now is Bitcoin. So I think the markets, and you're seeing this happen in real time, right? Bigger and more prestigious and smarter money, quote unquote, is figuring this out. Like, oh shit, this is the real thing. Like we now have to own some of this. And the people that don't see it or don't pay attention to it or don't wake up to that truth will have it forced upon them. So long as they like to breathe and eat and have shelter, like anything that money gets you, this truth will be forced on you at some point, because it will reach a critical mass that it starts to actually outcompete. You know, it's sort of slowly happening now, right? I mean, well, slowly, it's pretty damn fast in a historical context, but the US dollar is relatively stable day to day. But when Bitcoin hits a certain critical mass, there could come a point where people are just actively selling dollars to get into Bitcoin, and all of a sudden the dollar's lost its stability and has created this negative feedback effect. I was like, and that's what money is, right? It's like the more people trust this monetary system, the faster it outcompetes others. And Bitcoin is objectively better across all properties of money. So I think that, and Safety has actually there's two quotes that I really like. I got one from Saylor. He said, Trotsky has a quote that you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you, right? You cannot escape the consequences of warfare, right? Even it doesn't matter. You can be a peaceful protester, whatever, like it's going to impact your life. And a related quote that I got from Safety is that history shows that it is impossible to ignore the consequences of hard money, or ignore the consequences of someone holding a money harder than yours. And this means that you may choose to store your value in dollars, but there will come a point where enough people have woken up to Bitcoin being a better store of value technology that it will force you into Bitcoin. Your dollars will be losing value so rapidly, right? And like, I want to buy coffee next week. I want to travel and eat. Like, you get forced into this centripetal network effect of Bitcoin, where it's saying this is the best store of value in the world. The market is selecting for it. All other stores of value adjacent to it are collapsing into it. Your hand is forced. I mean, you could sit there all day and be like, I'm the most patriotic US dollar believer. I will never let this go. And you could even hold it all the way into your fucking grave. But if that dollar doesn't have value anymore, you'll be naturally selected out of existence. So it's like it becomes this inescapable gravity well of money. And
when you say out of existence naturally, why? Because with people with lower money, with less money.
Well, if your money goes to zero, how do you survive? How do you have kids? How do you pass your genes on? Like, what do you do?
Okay.
I'm not trying to say like you have to be a money grubbing, selfish person, but you need money to survive in this world.
Right.
And if you don't understand that, like if someone doesn't understand that, I know there's a lot of, I did yoga for years. I know people have this thing about money, like, no, you don't really need it. And it's like bullshit. It's the most important tool in the world.
Yeah.
The most important tool. And that's why people have fought and died over it and bent the rules and, whatever. It's the most important thing in the world. We know that. And tool-wise.
And you said something in one of your videos that I've literally been saying for 7 years, which is that the tool is amoral. You can, and what I've literally said for 7 years, you're not going to believe me because you said pretty much something identical, is that you can take a knife and kill someone, or you can slice through butter with that same tool. The human is the dark and the light, right? The human is the misuse, right?
Yes.
So where were we at? I was tying that back to something.
Well, I'll just say that I agree with you completely. The tool is amoral, and it's important to look at money that way.
Exactly.
Money is amoral, but it's a little bit interesting because when you look at fiat currency, right, this money that can have its supply arbitrarily expanded and used to take value from others, we could say that's amoral, right? There's no immorality baked into that. But it's a tool that's only useful for taking wealth from some and giving to others. So it's a tool of theft. So if you consider theft to be immoral, then we could actually say that certain types of money have an immoral character. And that's where the whole fiat currency relationship to morality thing comes into play. It may be immoral or amoral, but it's only useful for an immoral purpose. If you think theft is immoral, the tool of fiat currency is immoral in a way. Whereas, I don't want to say Bitcoin is moral money, but it is more moral money than fiat because you can't steal it. It cannot be used to steal. So the expression of theft as an immoral act is not possible through Bitcoin, where it is the sole purpose of fiat currency. So money is a different tool, right? Like we analogize it to the knife or the hammer. I think in my piece I say a hammer can be used to build a house or bash a skull, depending on the morality of the wielder.
Yeah.
Money's a little different. It actually has this design quality to it, where like it can be used to steal. This money can be used to steal, which theft is immoral, and this money cannot. So which one's more moral, right?
Yeah. Let me see where I want to take this here.
And on that topic, we're writing a book. I'm collaborating on a book with Jimmy Song and a bunch of other Bitcoiners. And our working title right now is Thank God for Bitcoin, the creation, corruption, and redemption of money. And it goes into, we're exploring the morality of money. That's why I'm kind of hot on this topic right now because we're writing about it. But it's a big deal, man. And I think inflation is it's cancerous to our morality.
Yeah. Totally. Let me just pause for a moment here.
Yep.
So I want to get some water and I want to raise my desk so I can stand, but I have more energy. I'm feeling super hyped right now. Where are you at?
Yeah, let's maybe, I'll go get water too. And maybe we'll do like another 20 minutes or so.
Perfect. Yeah. Pause the recording. I'll resume the recording here. We're just talking about health and just tuning into where we should guide this conversation. There's this pressure to know exactly what to speak about next, but I like the pause and the uncertainty of what's next. Um, so we can talk about health. While we were offline, Robert was just talking to me about health and his curiosity and detox. We can go into the questions I have here. Why don't you lead the way, man? What do you think?
Yeah, maybe we'll do a couple of questions and then you can just tell me a little bit about your health journey. That'd be cool.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I have something written down here. 20% of US dollars, 22% of US dollars were printed in 2020. Is this true?
That's what I hear. Yeah.
That's what you hear. Because you say it like that because we don't actually know, right? That's probably on the low end, right? Of what the
We
truth is.
don't know.
Okay.
Just like we don't know how much gold the central banks really have.
Uh-huh.
We get numbers, but they're not audited.
Okay, so that number's not audited. I'd imagine, if anything, it's even higher than that. What does that mean? Like, can you explain the magnitude? Because I understand it in my heart what that means, but can you explain to someone who doesn't understand this world at all and who doesn't understand the Ponzi scheme or the pyramid scheme that fiat is? What does it mean to have 22% of a currency printed in 1 year?
Yeah, it means that is a bellwether to a lot of dilution of value of that currency, right? So Federal Reserve was incepted in 1913, so it's been around. That's the U.S. central bank, has been around for 107 years. They've been, they are the monopolists in charge of producing dollars, which they is kind of interesting how it's produced actually. The government borrows money from the Fed, so they create debt that the Fed then creates dollars out of thin air to buy. And so the central bank is basically creating money at interest to itself, and then it also pays a dividend to its shareholders, which, as I mentioned, are also undisclosed. We don't know exactly who they are, but reach out to me. We've got an idea of who most of them are. And so for 107 years of producing dollars, we're in October now in 2020. The first 10 months of 2020 has seen the production of 22% of all dollars that have ever been created in 107 years. So on a time scale, you could say that less than 1% of the time spent producing dollars, right? Less than 1 year out of 107 years, we have produced 22% of the total supply. So the visualization would be like the production of dollars, and it's been getting faster over time. So it gets exponentially faster. And now we're in this full like parabolic spike upward. And you can see this data online too. You can look, Google USM2, and you should see a chart from the St. Louis Fed that shows that money supply growth. And that is a chart that depicts the proof of theft intrinsic to fiat currency, because when you produce a new dollar, you're not adding any value to the economy. You're not infusing it with any new tools or capital or human time. You're just reallocating the claims on that wealth away from the people that use dollars to the people that produce dollars. So what this means is that the rate of theft has accelerated to an unprecedented speed. And this is not something that happens immediately. People are always like, oh, well, the dollar's not inflating right now. What's going on? It's all, there's supply and demand. And right now, the demand for dollars is really high because money is an insurance policy on the uncertainty of the future. We're in a very uncertain time right now, right? So that insurance policy, that demand for future certainty to offset the uncertainty is very high. So central banks will print into that confidence, right? There's a lot of demand for dollars, so they can keep printing into it. But inflation always has this delayed effect. So I would say over the next decade, we're going to see a lot of pain in the US dollar. The US dollar, and this, again, comes in the form of price increases. So anything that's denominated in dollars, not anything. It varies widely across domains. So here's another way to think about it, because a lot of these terms get very esoteric and people get confused: inflation, deflation, whatever. The rate of production of US dollars, if that is faster than the rate of production of, say, ribeye, right? We're not making ribeye any faster, really. Maybe marginally a little bit, but not, 1,300% faster like we're doing dollars. Then ribeye beef will get much more expensive in dollar terms. Whereas if you look at something like the technology sphere, the rate of production of big screen TVs might actually get 50% faster this year because we keep getting more sophisticated technologically. So you'll actually, even though we've increased the rate of production of dollars 22%, you may actually still see electronics, which are very far on that end of the spectrum of things we get that are deflationary. We get much better at making them. May still come down in price. So inflation tends to flow into scarce assets is kind of the theme there.
Bitcoin.
And Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the only absolutely scarce asset in existence.
Mm-hmm. So where is it headed if it's on an exponential curve? Where is it headed, and how long? I know it's a guess, but how long would it take?
I mean, frankly, we're in totally uncharted waters. We're 50 years into the global implementation of fiat currencies. The Fed is the central bank of the world, so the dollar is the reserve currency of the world. Again, that centripetal network effect that markets demand one money, right? Or it's just one tool used for trading. And the value of money is how liquid it is. So the more liquid it is, the more valuable it is. So it has this power law effect where one money tends to win out the entire market. That's what gold was, that's what the dollar is, and that's what we think Bitcoin is. As far as how long, man, it is really hard to say. There's one of my good friends, and he's a great author, Parker Lewis. He writes a series called Gradually Then Suddenly. And this is hearkening back to, who's the author? The Old Man and the Sea? Hemingway?
Yep.
I think Hemingway said that's how you go bankrupt, gradually then suddenly. That's what happens with inflation. It's gradual for a long time, and then something happens, macroeconomic shock or a new corrupt administration, whatever it may be, that it just happens suddenly. So I would tend to believe that we're much closer to the suddenly phase at this point. Again, looking at that chart of USM2, it is full on parabolic spike upward. You see a lot of the socioeconomic quaking in the world, right? These protests and people are hurting out there this year. A lot of pain. So I'd say we're much closer to suddenly than gradually.
How would that, just as an example, like, I'm really curious about an example breakdown of what things would happen if we reach that suddenly. Like, how does that look? I don't know the history of money and in countries the way you do. So what would your estimate of how it would look?
Well, two things. One, there's a great book on this. It's called When Money Dies by Ferguson, I think is the author. And he charts exactly that. He goes through all these monetary systems and how they ended. And it's a great book. And typically, like the main consequences are that it's a total breakdown in trust. So you can trust your family and your friends, right? But that's not a monetary relationship. How do you trust everything else that comes into your house? Like, I'm looking behind you. You've got, kitchen fully equipped and stuff on the wall. Like, all that stuff was not delivered by your family and friends, right? You went and bought that in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. You would not be able to trust or interact with anyone in the marketplace when money collapses. Can't trade. So everything that you do that comes from the market, you no longer have access to. So things get super primitive, super fast, right? Now, I will say there is the possibility, because Bitcoin exists and we have no precedent for this, so we have no idea, but there is the possibility that it could be a less severe of a collapse as hyperinflations have been in the past. Because typically, like a Zimbabwe, when they hyperinflate, everyone tries to go into dollars, right? And then the government responds by restricting access to dollars. They say you can't export your Zimbabwe dollars, you can't exchange it for dollars, or they limit it with capital controls. So people get very desperate, right? They're stuck in this primitive game, and they can't adopt a better money because they don't have access to it. But with
I have a
Bitcoin,
billion Zimbabwe dollars right there in the other room, by the way. When you buy on River Financial, they send you.
they send you one.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, Alex and those guys are great. So that's the situation you got in a game with no access to better money. You're just stuck in this primitive cage. But with Bitcoin, we have this universally accessible money that no government can really shut down. Now they can block the endpoints, right? They can try and block bank transactions to Bitcoin companies. They can do all kinds of weird things around the edges, but they can't stop Bitcoin. They can't turn it off. They can't deactivate it. They can't block it. They can pass all the laws they want to make it illegal and whatnot, but the law will only be as effective as it is enforceable. And frankly, Bitcoin is the internet, right? So there is the possibility that Bitcoin could smooth a hyperinflation event.
It would be a safety net, is what you're saying.
Safety net, and things could get back to normal more quickly, right? Because people get pushed out of the dollar or whatever local currency into something else. You could, in theory, get into Bitcoin more quickly and get back to business. Be like, you know what, the dollars don't work anymore, but I'm going to send you sats for my new refrigerator.
Uh-huh.
And so things could get back to normal more quickly. But that's all theoretical. Frankly, we have no idea what this looks like.
Okay. My last question here is, what do you think are the largest risks of Bitcoin not doing what all of us bulls think it's going to do?
I speak emphatically, and so this is kind of a double-edged sword, maybe, where it's like you can be convincing about something, but I also want to be very clear that no one knows the future. Like that's what the definition of a black swan is an unknown unknown. And we're talking about a technology that's been around for 11 years, that's disrupting a technology that's been around for 5,000 years. And that inherently has a lot of uncertainty around it. Like who knows what's going to happen, right? We don't even know. This whole thing's built on the internet, right? Which the internet itself is 25 years old. So everything's very new, very rapid, this change that's been going on. So that I can't specify it and say this is a particular risk that I think, because that's very difficult to do with Bitcoin. And that's why people become so bullish, because the closer you get to Bitcoin and the more you study it, the more bulletproof the thesis becomes, which is actually inverse to most other deals I've looked at. Most deals you look at from a distance, you're very excited by, like, oh, this thing has a lot of promise, whatever, and you get closer to it and you're like, oh, here's where it could be disruptive, or here's a potential shortcoming. Bitcoin's the opposite. So you see it from a distance, you're like, yeah, right, magic internet, governments, they're never gonna let that shit happen. Yeah. And then the closer you get to it, you're like, this thing's inevitable. Like it's just, you can't stop it. But that is, you just have to know that no one knows, I guess, is the gist of it. And we're in, like I said, uncharted territory. We just don't know what we don't know. So,
do you bet the farm on something that you don't know?
I'm irresponsibly long. I'm in that camp.
Me too.
And it's become something that's worth living and dying for, to me. Because, as we touched on earlier, this thing is the one shot humanity has had at dethroning the perpetual war machine and the perpetual theft of central banking. This has been the boom and bust cycle of society. Society starts to trade a lot, produce a lot of capital and wealth. People get decadent. The people that own the rules of money start to bend them to their favor. The currency collapses, then the society collapses, right? And then outside societies come in and raid it, and it starts all over. So the currency collapse has always presaged the social collapse. And for the first time in history, we have something that can't be compromised. So it's like this entirely new foundation to build this next level of society. If we're going to evolve and be better than we have been and take civilization to the next level, it has to be built on Bitcoin. There's no other way. So for me, that's like, I'm all in.
Hell yeah, man. Hell yeah. I love it. Sweet.
This is awesome, man.
Yeah, it's a good chat.
Yeah.
All right, should we wrap it up there?
I'll mic drop it right there.
Great. So where can people find you?
So I'm on Twitter, which is at breedlove22.
Mm-hmm.
That's my last name, BREEDLOVE 22. You can also check out our website, parallaxdigital.io, PARALLAX digital.io. And then we just launched a YouTube channel. I will send you the link to that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'll put it in the info description.
Okay,
I'm already
cool.
subscribed. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And we just started slicing and dicing some of my interviews to make some little snippets. And then I started doing some long form extemporization on my written pieces. So I'll just go through one of my written pieces and talk about it for a while. We did that for Masters and Slaves of Money, which is my most recently published piece. And then I'm going to do it for all my other pieces as well. And then we're also doing, it's like a podcast slash YouTube channel. And I'm calling it the What is Money Show. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be talking to people, influential thought leaders from across different domains in long form content. So we're just going to go really deep on these topics. And my first guest, so I won't announce, I haven't announced yet, but we recorded for 11 hours.
Holy
so we're going to chop that into, 8 or 10 episodes and release it. And it's, you talked about truth finding earlier. Like that's what I want to get at, is like, I will sit and talk to you for as long as it takes to try and get to the bottom of whatever we're going to talk about. And really for me, it's just to satisfy, I feel so fortunate because I get to satisfy my own personal curiosity. Like I get to sit down with people and have a really deep conversation, which I just enjoy. I just love to do that, period. And then people, through the writing and work I've been doing, people have really seemed to enjoy it. So I hope the world will benefit from it as well.
Hell yeah, man. I'll post all those links. I'm going to post links to all your write-ups. I've mostly listened to them, but I'll post the written ones for people who prefer to read. And guys, if this episode hasn't convinced you, go listen to some more of his work. And every time I listen to him speak, he either costs me or makes me a lot of money because I end up buying more Bitcoin. So I'll know in a few years if you've cost me or made me money. But
you're probably pretty happy with me right now.
I'm happy with you now. That's for sure. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So thank you guys. And if you're watching this and you're a fan of Robert's and you don't know me, you can check out my site, thedetoxdudes.com, where I help people with their health, spirituality, and emotional well-being through the power of detoxification of the body, cleaning all the organs, the tissues of heavy metals, parasites, plastics, chemicals, all the stuff that this world has been bombarded with. Just like the fiat pyramid scheme, I'd say the health pyramid scheme is even worse. So
I was gonna say, you're like cleansing people of the fiat collateral we're all put into our.
Yeah. All right. So ciao, guys.